Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to talk about the movie Hollow Man. This is a Kevin Bacon, Elizabeth Shue film. Ultimately, you might remember Elizabeth Shue from movies like, or the show The Boys that has recently currently came out. Also, you have Josh Brolin in this movie, which ultimately very rare of appearances that you eventually see Josh Brolin in. Movies like Into the Blue, which ultimately had Paul Walker in that. You have, of course, Josh Brolin, more notably being known for being Thanos from any of the Avengers films, or any of the Marvel films, what so have you. Josh Brolin also has done The Goonies, which a lot of people can remember him as really his first appearance in a film. So, going on to here, we have reasonably some interesting characters, uh, some interesting actors, and hopefully I will probably let you know whenever we go into those characters, or probably not. So, Hollow Man. Really, this one is a really just a different kind of spin on a old classic of The Invisible Man. Really, here we are. I think it's just been a while since we've kind of gone into the idea of like, what would somebody do if they were invisible? What would they do? Would they, would they whisper to somebody? Would they sneak into somebody's home? Would they try to murder a bunch of people because ultimately they don't want to have things come out? Like them being invisible? Maybe that happens in any number of these films happen into this film. But when looking at it, I kind of find this movie fun. Like some people could find it to be like kind of like another kind of just kind of like a goofy film because you have all the people with the goggles and reasonably they don't wear the goggles a lot in this film, and that annoys the crap out of me every time I see this film. I'm like, why aren't you wearing goggles to ultimately see said Bacon Man? Why aren't you seeing the bacon with no goggles? You don't have goggles? Why not? That's what bugs the crap out of me. They have all these like gadgets and goggles and guns and stuff like that, but they rarely even use any number of them in this movie. That's the thing that bugs the crap out of me in this film. But anyways, so going on into this, I reasonably, when watching this, there are some scenes that I think stick out more than others. But there are also some maybe brutal like scenes that people might be shocked at when ultimately you will see this film or remember about this film. Recently, from watching the movie Girl on the Third Floor, which I believe is still currently on Netflix. People can go out of their way to see it. Because I've seen it. And there is a point in that movie where you have a dog that is, let's just say, in a dryer who is dead. And so that is a very brutal scene in that movie. But if anything, there is a much worse scene that goes on with the dog in this film. So ultimately, if you guys are dog lovers, just letting you know there is a scene with a dog that you might just want to look away from. But every other part of this film is like okay for viewing, watching at some points, with the exclusion of like some stuff that happens with women at some point in this movie. But when also looking at it, it's anyways, so there is at points some either I would call it either uh, romance or really just kind of pushing of buttons in this movie. Where if somebody wants something, he's going to see if he can get it. And see if this person is interested and having their buttons be pressed. Speaking of buttons, at some point, the more iconic scene that I think a lot of people would probably remember from this movie is at some point we have a character named Sarah that ultimately falls asleep uh, behind her kind of announcer-ish like table or camera table, and so she ends up falling asleep, and Kevin Bacon ends up going, you know what? This girl has consistently been giving me crap. I'm gonna get back at her and see if she notices. And ultimately, he has some fun brushing her hair, and then dare say undresses her to have a little fun, but then runs away. So, very iconic scene. I think if any within this movie, I think that's the more notable scene out of this movie that I think people will remember. I like this film. I think that it's overall just kind of like it is kind of edgy at points, I guess you could say that. Like there is some interesting deaths in this film. There's some interesting effects in this film, and there is also maybe at some point some goofy story stuff going on that people might just roll their eyes at some point, especially with that whole goggle thing. That whole goggle thing. Why? Justifiably. If anything, you get one scene where a girl is mentioning that she wants to like go to the bathroom with him on, but anywhere else. Anyways, let's go out of our way to talk about the spoilers of this movie. Reasonably, yeah, it's really it just comes down to a movie that has a lot of egos, and you have a lot of people that are kind of tugging and pulling at control, to where ultimately you have also some interesting music that is put into this film, because I actually like some of the songs that are presented in this film. Every single time I watch this movie, I'm like, here's the good song that I liked. Because there's like two of them. Whenever Kevin Bacon is in a car and he has like a song on in the background, I'm like, man, this song is great. I like this song. It's really fun. So, anyways, let's go into that spoiler time, because it's about that time to roll out I guess you could say, spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. So, spoilers now. So, in the very beginning of this film, Kevin Bacon, of course, is not making breakfast. Instead, he is very much vitally typing away at his computer, because I always have to mime computering. And as if computering is a word, and I hope it is, because. So, anyways, Kevin Bacon computering away, and so we have to where Kevin Bacon is ultimately trying to come up with with this algorithm, with this not YouTube algorithm, but algorithm nonetheless, this this connection to try to figure out how to make a gorilla again, because in the end, this gorilla or ape is invisible. So that's the whole cue. We ultimately have it to where Kevin Bacon ultimately figures out how to figure out or crack this code while looking up at his ceiling, letting him know, like, shouldn't you be working? So, recently, eventually, Kevin Bacon phones Elizabeth Shue up, and he's like, yeah, I cracked the code. I did it. Like, it was kind of more of a Zoom call, well, the equivalent of a Zoom call in the year 2000. And so, reasonably, we have to where Linda is like, oh, great, so now we can figure this out. So, of course, they go into there and they test this ape right away with this stuff. Here's my thing, though. I was very baffled or confused about the whole like color system of things. I'm like, wait a minute, why is it that like one thing is orange and one thing is blue. Shouldn't it be like all the same colors? I guess not. I guess they had to really like, yeah, we have to make these colors stand out to where when people are getting injected, they're getting blue. But oh no! But when you get cured, you have to get an orange. Just jab in your arm. I was like, okay, I guess like food coloring or something like that to really go through someone's system so you can kind of see the like when they have to do the special effects for everything, you could see the orange going through everyone, or you could see the blue going through everybody, or whatever. But yeah, I thought the special effects with the gorilla and Kevin Bacon were really fun to see, like them completely reappearing for your eyes or disappearing from your eyes. Ultimately, we have the ape and or gorilla. I'm going to call him gorilla. We'll just call him that. Everything worked out. Everything was copacetic. And so reasonably, we have it to where now Kevin Bacon is like, yeah, this works. Woohoo! But so now they end up going to their like 4-star generals, and they end up going to a character called Dr. Howard William Devane or Devon. I'm gonna say Devane. It's probably pronounced wrong, but that's neither here nor there. So we have it to where ultimately Kevin Bacon is ultimately just like, ha ha ha, well, I'm going to tell them about my test that I found out. And so recently we have it to where uh, Linda, who is Elizabeth Shue, Josh Brolin's character, who is Matthew, and Kevin Bacon, who's Sebastian, going to these people. But ultimately, Sebastian doesn't want to tell them that everything has worked out. He's like, no, I'm kind of scared about telling them that this process had worked out. Like I don't want them to take control of my baby. And Josh Brolin's character is like, "Whoa, wait a minute there. Like they're going to take over it anyways." Linda is really pushing that it's like you just want to be the first one, don't you? You want to be the person that like is invisible. Because again, Sebastian has a huge ego. Sadly, he can't throw his shoulder over his he can't throw his ego over his shoulder or just fling it around just in a windmill like motion, but still this guy has a big ego. So big that people get freaking hit with it. That's how dangerous this guy's ego is. So we have it to where now Sebastian is like, well, hey, I they tell everybody like, hey, like how did the meeting go? They lie to them. They say everything's swell. They're telling us to go to the next process, to the next procedure, to ultimately now do human testing. And they're like, oh, okay, great, but who's gonna do that now? And Kevin Bacon says, well, I said myself, and they went with it. And everybody's really skeptical. Everybody's like, I don't think so. Like, nah, like if anything, I'm not gonna trust you being invisible. Are you kidding me? So we have it to where seemingly everybody goes along with this, and nobody questions anything, and everyone's okay with it. So they end up going along and they have the Kevin Bacon, being strapped onto the table. And now it seems like a lot of times, every single time somebody has to be put on this table, their life is on the line. And basically you have to like paddle them, or you have to like save their life because they're almost freaking dead. You basically have to so we have to where Kevin Bacon, of course, just like the gorilla, because the gorilla was like thrashing and like going all over the place while she was getting re put together, so to speak. We have Kevin Bacon who is getting together, so to speak, invisible in words, and so reasonably he goes into this procedure and he's telling them, of course, like, oh, I'm I'm starting to feel something on my arm. I'm starting to feel it in my chest, and then he's like, Pah! He's freaking like his back is like he's like slinging like his body, and he's like thrashing, and everybody's like, oh my god, and they're like, here we go again, and so really the entire time, like people are asking Kevin Bacon, Sebastian's like, hey, like, how do you feel? How do you think he feels? He's probably gonna die. So reasonably, like, Kevin Bacon is thrashing to the point of them almost needing to, like, they were thinking about like maybe getting the paddles on him because they were thinking that his heart was gonna escalate too far and to where they needed to like bring him back to earth, so to speak. But recently, it seems like his heart was going steady, even though again he was thrashing the entire time. And so eventually, he ends up becoming invisible. We realize that eventually, when Kevin Bacon wakes up from being invisible, that his eyes are transparent, that he can like his like he can basically, like, light freaking hurts him, and so recently we have to where he needs to kind of push light aside or dim lights because, like, it's not like he can like cover his eyes and not see anything, um, and what have you. So ultimately, going in here at some points, he is kind of joking around with his coworkers, kind of like at some points we have Carter Abbey, which is Greg Grunberg, which ultimately I remember him from Heroes, but I had also seen him in another movie as well. We have Joey Slotnick, who ultimately plays Frank Chase, who ultimately is the guy who is repetitiously in his environment calling his wing heaven, because he's kind of overseeing everything. And we also have Janice, who plays Mary Randall, who is also kind of the overseer of the heaven portion as well. The funny portion of this is when they kind of mention how they have to like prep for all the doctors, or recently they're kind of taking bids on who gets Sebastian's Porsche. So Kevin Bacon or Sebastian is ultimately going into like grabbing people and like jumping up from behind them, and ultimately that's where we get the goggles coming in, to where we get Frank Chase, who ultimately is putting on his goggles, and he's like, oh well, I'm going to try to find you, Sebastian. And so then eventually he does find him, and then Kevin Bacon just kind of like scares some other people. But yeah, it's like consistently people are like, "Oh my god, he passed by me," or some other. I thought this kind of stuff was kind of fun, because reasonably there's a lot of times where people are gonna like think that they are going to be in a room with someone, which they are not. So going into this, we eventually have it to where things are seemingly going. They're trying to figure out the reverse process to get Kevin Bacon back to being himself, and so reasonably, they end up having it to where Kevin Bacon is kind of questioning whether or not he wants to be turned back. And so we have where Kevin Bacon at first is supposedly sleeping in this bed, and people are doing 24-hour surveillance on him, ultimately checking up on him, and eventually he is sneaking away to otherwise see if he could scare his coworkers or even take advantage of them while they're sleeping. Or when they do fall asleep, he can kind of do a number of things. Eventually, taking a dog that is repetitiously barking and make it so it's not barking anymore, let's just say, by ending up smashing it a couple times, which is a horrible scene to watch. But I completely forgot that portion of this movie was in here. And I was like, oh my god, no! But anyways, but that happens later on in the film. So, ultimately, the very first thing that Kevin Bacon does is, of course, we have Sarah in this movie that ultimately she is really the girl that is very protective of her animals, and Sebastian is really telling her, it's like, well, hey, like, aren't you glad that we're now going to be having human testing, so now we can leave your animals alone? And so we have to where Sarah is sleeping, and of course, Kevin Bacon ends up basically unbuttoning Sarah, brushing her hair to the side, and just having a good time, and she ultimately wakes up, and he runs off. So, recently it seems that Sarah, as well as like some other people, kind of mention some underhanded things that they think Sebastian is doing, but no one can really confirm it. We also have Sebastian that is also lying or denying that he did anything, that really he's just saying that he's like, oh no, I just went up for coffee, or I couldn't sleep, so I just kind of walked around. Because ultimately, when Sarah tells Linda and Matthew's character about, like, yeah, I think he took advantage of me, or I think he did something to me, but I'm not sure, because I don't know, it could have just been me sleeping, or I don't know, but like I felt. And it's like, well, you can't confirm anything because evidently there's not enough cameras all the way through this entire environment, this entire building, evidently. I guess that's the stupid thing that no one else did, was like put cameras everywhere, as well as them having goggles seemingly not all the time. So we have a tour in this movie that they end up thinking that they're going to be able to test the reverse process, and so reasonably they are now doing the reverse process on the human, now having the orange needle instead of the blue one, because again those colors were just like, why do they have to be two different colors? But whatever, I guess. So we have to where needle is inserted, and the first time around Kevin Bacon just says like, hey, like, I'm gonna insert my own needles, that way no one will get blamed but me if something goes wrong. Josh and Kevin in that first time around ultimately make a bet on if this was gonna work or not, and eventually Kevin is gonna come around asking for that bet. There was also a very funny Superman Wonder Woman joke in that first time around, but anyways, it is what it is. Before Kevin becomes the Invisible Man. So, anyways, we have it to where now we have the reverse process, and now we have it seemingly where, of course, wouldn't you think this reverse process is not going to work out? Because why would it? We have it seemingly where Sebastian is thrashing around again, and to the point to where eventually he is mentioning that he cannot breathe, to where he is like basically unstrapping, kicking and punching his his co-workers Matthew and Carter. And so reasonably, we have where Kevin or Sebastian eventually just goes into shock and becomes invisible and nothing works. So they end up having to test to figure out, okay, what went wrong. They're trying to do some procedures together, or they're trying to mathematically figure the cure of this out, and it seems like they're not getting there. Uh, all the while, they're also just kind of leery about Sebastian being out because they're like, well, is stuff going to affect his mind like the animals? Like, is it going to be that he's going to even be more dickish than he would be, and this and that? So it seems like we get eventually within this movie to where Kevin Bacon just needs to go out. There's only so long that he can be in this, be here waiting for eventually them to come up with a cure. And it really doesn't seem like he like eats a lot or drinks a lot or whatever. But anyway, so we have to where Kevin just eventually goes to Carter, who ultimately is again from Heroes, and just mentions like, dude, I gotta go out. Like I gotta leave. Like I'm so stir crazy. I need to go. And Carter's is like, wait, what a minute, what? Like, it's like, dude, we can't just let you go out. But really, what happens is eventually they have like a silicone like face for him to wear. Ultimately, cutting out the eyes and the mouth part, where ultimately he can look like a normal human, and so that is the mask that he tends to wear. You have a security guard that can't really tell the difference, and so eventually we have Sebastian going out, having a night on the town, scaring some kids, but ultimately he just kind of goes back to his apartment to just eventually check some things out, kind of grab some food of his, and then ultimately realizes again that he has a smoking hot neighbor that he wants to go and check out. Because reasonably, in the early part of this movie, we had his neighbor who ultimately seemingly wasn't dressing, getting ready for bed, and he was like, "Oh man, like it's too bad that she couldn't have just gave me a little bit of a show, but I guess that's too bad." So reasonably, when you have yet another time where you see this very attractive woman across the pond, let's just say, we have it to where Sebastian is just like, well, like, couldn't I? Like, couldn't I just be able to finally, like, be able to, like, I've been looking over at this woman so often and I never got to see, like, a show. So, how would I go over there and see a show? So, we have it to where Kevin Bacon makes his way over to this apartment to knock on her door. No one's there. Of course, Kevin Bacon comes on in. This girl eventually is kind of, I guess, from right out of the shower, and ultimately just kind of like cleaning herself up, looking at herself in some mirror edge like device that seems to consistently is like shifting and or adjusting. So at first she adjusts it, but then she realizes is like, okay, why is this thing moving so much? I've never had it move so much before. And that is where we ultimately see this woman uh, ultimately getting uh, taken advantage of by Sebastian. Ultimately to be kind of at the very end of this huddled in the fetal position, and just because she couldn't see who her attacker was. So kind of a sad moment, to be pretty honest. But so we move on, and so we have to where seemingly Linda ultimately goes to Sebastian's place and realizes that his face is off. Not in a Nicolas Cage like way, but you can understand. Like he like took his mask and everything off and just had some fun. So eventually we have to where Kevin Bacon heads back to the headquarters, and so reasonably everybody wants kind of like a debriefing of all the stuff that he did. You kind of have Carter that is like, man, like, did you mess with anybody? Like, did you scare anybody? Did you did you whisper in anybody? Did you did you see any women? Did you like have fun with any women? What did you do? And kind of Kevin Bacon is trying to like he'll say little things here and there, but really he's keeping his mouth sealed. He's trying to just like, well, I think I kind of scared a woman, and like I think I did that, but like he won't admit too much of anything else. So while also this is going on, at some points or another, Kevin Bacon is also like investigating Linda, really trying to one see if ultimately she wants to sleep with the Invisible Man, which ultimately she pushes him away, and ultimately is just she ultimately mentions it's like, well, it's not about what I can see, it's about what I don't feel. And so we have this consistent time where we find out that, of course, Josh Brolin's character and Elizabeth Shue's characters, of course, having a relationship, and Kevin Bacon's character sniffs that out. Eventually, seemingly to throw a brick and or rock into this window, kind of stalling this whole a relationship of sorts. So, because this entire time, Matthew and Linda are keeping this relationship under wraps. They don't want to tell anybody, but reasonably, it's like, dude, how long are you gonna go with this without telling anybody? But anyways, so we have it seemingly where Sebastian is consistently pressing to have Linda come back with him in a relationship, but Linda is consistently just like, oh my god, I can't wait to for Matthew to come home to me so he can ravage me, I guess. Anyway, I think you could say that word. Probably not, but nah, I already said it. Too late now. So within this movie, we have it to where after the betrayal, or what I guess Sebastian would call betrayal, I would just say it's like, well, dude, she chose somebody else. But also, Sebastian could ultimately think that, like, God, like, Matthew has been stealing everything from me and trying to steal everything from me, even to the point of Matthew trying to Josh Brolin's character coming up with this cure, which ultimately doesn't actually work. It goes into 95%, and then it ultimately goes all the way backwards to where it almost could have possibly killed Kevin Bacon's character. So eventually we have a tour in this movie that Kevin Bacon's character takes the camera that is showcasing him sleeping, and ultimately he modifies the camera so he can just sneak out whenever he wants and do whatever he wants. So recently it eventually just consistently makes it to where people feel so uneasy at a lot of points in time. They're assessing whether Sebastian is in their home or not, or they're assessing whether or not like Sebastian could be anywhere. so we have in here, because people can't wear goggles in this movie. I'm gonna keep saying that because it bugged me. It did. I was like, dude, you have the headgear. You can see him. But then ultimately, eventually within this movie, the goggles end up becoming rendering moot. So frickin' they have to just go in and just Well, I can't use the goggles now. I have to now try to figure out where the Bacon Man is. I'm so scared. So we have where now the closer and closer that we get to Kevin Bacon is starting to just take out his past teacher, his ultimate person that is putting together the funding for this project. We have to where Kevin Bacon drowns him because we have Linda and Matthew who are just like, dude, like we we had Sebastian do this procedure and now it's blowing up in our face. And so now I'm going to come to you, guy who had funded this project, and like we're telling you this now. So we have to where this goofy name, Dr. Howard, who ultimately is telling basically Matthew and Linda to clean out their desks. Like, dude, like this procedure's over. I'm probably gonna steal your anyways because there's a Hollow Man 2 that is eventually gonna come out of this movie. So get ready for that. So, which I think has Christian Slater in it. If it's been a while since I've seen that movie, but anyways, so we have to where Bacon drowns said Dr. Howard in a pool, and then ultimately you see that cool effect of Kevin Bacon actually drowning this person and then eventually getting out of the pool, which I thought that whole scene, I'm like, man, this scene looks really cool. Because you have it to where not only like the Dr. Howard is blowing a smoke to where you could see Kevin Bacon, but then the drowning and then him getting out of the pool. That whole sequence was really cool to me. And so reasonably we have it to where Kevin Bacon gets out of the pool, drowns the guy, and then reasonably Sebastian is now going to lock this environment that every single person is in down because they had called an alpha meeting. And so alpha meeting got everyone together all down underneath this underground experimental place. Because here's my thing, why did it have to be underground where you had only an elevator that only was queued up by a certain code like thing? You would think something like this wouldn't have to be this like procedure wouldn't have to be under this underground experimental thing. Like, are they really like, does this really have to be that top secret of an invisible man, I guess? But anyways, so we have to where Linda and Matthew are finally coming clean to all the co-workers, mentioning that like, yeah, like we didn't really clear this with the head honchos. Basically we just went and did this on our own because we wanted to be the ones to take all the credit and this and that, and everybody's like, oh my god, they're like slapping people and people are throwing chairs and whatever. They're all like up on an uproar because they're so angry that they weren't telling them the truth since the get-go. And so now we have to where Linda and Matthew are trying to leave out of this elevator and they can't. They're using their codes and it's not working. Matthew and Linda scramble back to their other co-workers. We have it to where Frank is looking at the computer and noticing that all of the passwords have been erased with the exclusion of Sebastian. So it's like, oh my god, he's gonna lock us in here because we have the supposedly if these people aren't going to go up through this elevator, that like I guess it will take the security guy days to realize that they're otherwise not like, man, their cars have been here for a number of days. What is going on? Maybe I should check this out. But we have it where the Kevin Bacon, the Sebastian, is ultimately going and one by one killing every single person. At first, we have people walking out with their goggles on, and they're like, "Yeah, we're gonna have our little tranquilizer guns and our goggles, and this is gonna work out, right?" So they end up strolling out, and of course, Kevin Bacon ends up killing Janice first. Ultimately, ends up like taking a string and suffocating her and killing her. So we ultimately have the people at some point circle back to eventually find this girl left in the locker, and she falls out of the locker because they assume that it's probably Sebastian at first, but it's not. So, cue them killing even more people. We have them separate, which is always a stupid thing to do in a movie, but you can't stop separating people. We ultimately have Carter and Matthew, who eventually make their way to eventually try to find Sebastian, and Matthew ends up getting, Carter ends up getting like holstered up and choked, and we have it to where Carter ends up getting tossed off to the side to where he gets his jugular vein opened and he's bleeding out, and uh, Matthew is using a fire extinguisher to try to find Kevin's character. Because reasonably, yeah, he is wearing the goggles, but at some point, Kevin is also releasing a lot of heat signatures, releasing a lot of ventilation that is having, of course, a heat signature, which is ultimately like the Predator, to where, like, okay, like now these glasses don't work. I need to throw these glasses aside because the heat signatures are everywhere. So we have it to where Josh is shoving out these extinguishers, trying to find Kevin. Kevin is ultimately like, "Hey, I think we should pay up that bet now, because someone's gonna die." So reasonably, Matthew ends up getting to the point of having Kevin Bacon go off, and so recently everybody is checking on Carter. Sarah is also getting blood for Carter to keep him alive, and so justifiably Kevin is going for everyone else and kind of leaving Matthew and Linda to, because eventually more people show up, and Kevin Bacon feels outnumbered, so he leaves off. So we have it to where Carter is bleeding out. We have Sarah, who eventually is feeling that Kevin Bacon is in the room with her. So instead of saving Carter with this blood, she ends up chucking all the blood all over the room and desperately asking for Kevin to make one step. And instead, reasonably, like, we have Sebastian, who is already in one area that Sarah didn't prepare for, and so reasonably she ends up flinging blood on him for her ultimately to get her own, or to have her own tranquilizer gun, but sadly enough, Kevin Bacon's character outmuscles her and shoots her in the chest as well. Ultimately, just kind of weirdly, like, kind of like realizing that, yeah, you're going to die soon. So ultimately, like, we did have a lot of fun once, right? As he snaps her neck and then ultimately just kind of wipes his blood off of her. Uh, so and then ultimately she ends up getting shoved in this fridge. So we have Frank, uh, Frank, we have Linda, we have Matthew, all checking on Carter as he's bleeding out. Linda is basically telling everyone, yeah, he's dead. Like, he might as well be dead. So they push him off. They basically just run off as this guy is just bleeding to death, bleeding out and dying. So we have it to where Matthew gives Frank the fire extinguisher and just tells him, like, yeah, just blaze everywhere. Shoot the extinguisher everywhere. We can see him that way. But we have it to where Matthew is everybody's trying is eventually finding uh, Sarah's body, and so ultimately we have it to where Sebastian is going to stab Frank in the back with his crowbar. This crowbar, I think, becomes a big thing. We also have it to be uh, Sebastian also stabs Josh Brolin's character in the chest with the crowbar, falls over. Uh, Kevin Bacon seals the deal on this refrigerator, but the only thing is, eventually we have it to where Linda figures out some metallic or magnet device that otherwise pushes the door back open. While that is going on, taking forever for us to have these people in a refrigerator, freezing to death, supposedly, or where Josh's character is like, I'm so cold, I can't feel anything. And ultimately, Linda's like holding onto his hand. She's like, "Well, can you feel this?" And he's like, "Little." It's like, that was a tiny bit cringe, but whatever. Like when looking at it, excuse me. That's fine. That whole little thing there. But anyways, so we have to have like romantic moments consistently in this movie. Anyways, Sebastian is putting together these bizarre bombs made of all these concoctions. So in other words, he's just making any random like, hey, this is probably apple juice. I'm gonna put apple juice into this thing, throw this, and there's gonna be an explosion that happens after I throw this uh, this weird looking juice thing, um, this little jug thing, and then there's gonna be explosions afterwards. So we also have it to where Kevin Bacon is putting together some bomb that is timed out for 5 minutes, and ultimately this bomb is nitrous. Because eventually we have it to where after Linda is opening this door, eventually she notices the nitrous bomb, and Matthew's like, "Don't tamper with it. We just got to get out of here." So we have this scrambling moment to where they're trying to get out of there, but also they are trying to also take down Kevin. And what ends up happening is uh, Matthew is kind of set off to have a little dumpster fire, like bringing him back to health. And Linda is eventually going to Sebastian in this elevator and torching him to death, supposedly, or like torching, doing like a flamethrower esh like device. That looked really cool. You have Kevin who is just kind of running and like taking off a portion of his mask or taking off a portion of clothes, or and then eventually he eventually becomes invisible again, to where we have Linda who turns on the sprinklers. It gets to the point where eventually Kevin is behind her, but ultimately Matthew gets a jump on Kevin, takes him out, and so ultimately they rush to the elevator to try to get out of here, but they have to climb out of the elevator because the thing's going to explode. Eventually, Sebastian is making his way because evidently he's just a survivalist of explosions, and he makes his way to this elevator to be on this ladder to try to grab on to Linda, and eventually they fall onto the elevator. I'm like, of course they do. Like, of course they fall in the elevator because this is like the real like. Oh, are they both gonna die? Is she gonna have to like jump up and like he falls or like what's gonna go on here? And plus, this elevator is like shooting up and down like nobody's business. And like eventually the brakes are breaking, and like this whole elevator is up and down, falling apart, and like because of explosion, because this explosion really took out this elevator and made it fly all the way up to fly all the way down, freaking hitting Linda in the shoulder. So we really just eventually have it to be that Linda ends up having eventually Kevin Bacon fall to his death. We have Linda who makes it back up to the ladder, and like they're both just noticing the destruction, and Josh Brolin's like, my God. And she's like, not my God anymore. And then we just have them just roll off to credits as they are being ambulanced away. And I'm like, God, that line was kind of cheesy. But, like, some stuff about this movie was a little bit cheesy. But, like, when looking at it, you have, like some moments where it's like an ego or it's like a little fun. Like I think that's why a lot of times like action movies and stuff like that did away with like the catchphrases and stuff like that. Really, once we got into the like, I think every once in a while we throw little funny anecdotes in, but I think we've really, I hope, gotten away from those one-liners and stuff like that where we have to have like it's been revoked at the end, at the tail end of every movie. So reasonably, yeah, that's all I have to say about Hollow Man. I always find this movie to be fun. It's always a rewatchable movie, and I hope if you've already seen this movie, you probably want to go back and watch it again. There was a lot of fun moments where you had Kevin Bacon kind of reveal to the kids that he that he and he ultimately goes, it's like, and the kids are like, oh my God, and the mother's like, what? And they're trying to mention like what they saw, and, as if their mother is going to believe them. Uh, that is always like a really funny and iconic moment. Really, it's just like if ultimately you are an invisible person, like I think probably the one thing would it would probably end up being like you doing just like stupid stuff like going through a store and just like like this store is open for me, I guess, because what's gonna happen when you like open one of these or figure out a way to open one of these stores, or just stay around till the store closes and then just randomly like shop your way through and then ultimately fall asleep somewhere and then wake up again and just kind of just like, yeah, I have all this stuff now. um I guess that would be a thing to do, but then again, how would you be able to hold any of that stuff, or get away with it or whatever? If anything, I guess you could probably just unlock any number of the doors and then just leave. But again, like security, you might be able to get away with it, but I think it would probably just be, I guess, probably if anything, it would probably, oh, you can do any number of things. I'm sure there's a lot of like to me, like me just mentioning like shopping would be a bizarre thing. Like, dude, you could do any number of other, and shopping is your thing. Yeah, it's simple, but why not? Uh, like shopping, you could get any number of things. Like I guess you could like, if anything, to me, there isn't like, oh, I need to go and sneak into this person's house and make fun of them. Why? That would seem so lame. As an invisible person, I think I probably wouldn't like. For me, honestly, I probably if it happened to me, like I wouldn't have a good use for it probably. So what would be the point of being invisible? You're probably better off being like super strong or something like that if it's a ability you can have. But yeah, so I think with that, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.